how does the AI change this, if any?
The code generation, of course, it's free now. That doesn't mean the product development is free. Try marrying that to a production system that's serving regulated customers at scale. Your little agent that you spun out last night, it could potentially cause a data breach. There's a lot of stake involved right now because the risk of something going wrong is pretty high. And the only way to truly understand how to change an organization or a process or your product is to physically do it yourself. The folks that do that are going to be fine. The folks that don't, I really question what the trade-off is in their mind.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening in for another episode of Build to Scale. Today, I'm speaking with Kevin Trilli, Chief Product and Technology Officer of FIS Originations. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Before we really get into the details, you have both the Chief Product and Chief Technology title. When did you decide that those two jobs really belong together?
Yeah, I think over the years, there's been different reasons for it. And just, the roles themselves, it kind of begs a few minutes of introduction around because they've sort of traded places in many ways also. Obviously product management is really built around the what are you building and why. And there's a lot of market inward roles that are role positioning that happens with that type of function. And then it's a lot of figuring out the vision of the product and kind of strategy and all those pieces. And obviously technology is all about the underlying platform. How do you execute and build a high scalable, usually, larger organization, bring quality, technology innovation, platform, all that kind of stuff. And I think over time, organizations, especially as they scale up, have different needs or oftentimes just have different people show up at different times that fill the need of the organization. And when that person is there, depending on their background, they may be asked to take one or both sides of the role until the company gets to a certain size where they manage up. So from my background, I've had that in most of my history has been around venture scale companies, and I did a 0 to 1 company myself where you actually do this role together as one mindset. And I think just generally it comes down to where the organization needs support and focus. And then could that person manage either interimly or permanently both sides? So I think historically that's what's kind of happened with the role. And I've had the opportunity to take opportunistic scenarios. I'm a product person by history, many decades of doing that, and have added in the technology in the later part of the life, in this dual role. So it kind of depends on the organizational need, the person you bring in. Oftentimes you've seen product initially buried under technology organizations, and this is historical. And the company usually figures out that they're building a product to spec or they're missing what the customer really wants. And there's an art to discovery. And usually the product management, and I've run into this, gets pulled out into a separate product organization. And then you bring in someone like myself or, a different role that's similar to really mature that function. So that's a very typical pattern. Start it in engineering or tech and then bring it out as his own thing. Or you have a founder or someone that's kind of done it and then you just bring in one person and then you build the tech org under that and you spin out the tech org once you have a sizable organization. So there's a couple different models that have led to this evolution where I think now the crux of our conversation is what does it look like going forward? And we'll get to that over the next hour.
Yeah. And maybe before going there, AI is on everybody's mind, and how does that come into play? AI is definitely impacting engineering organization for sure with cloud code and everything, right? But also in product management, I'm seeing AI being applied more and more. And there is so much that you can get done with kind of consuming all of that data and so much quicker and so much rapider. So how does the AI change this, if any?
Yeah, no, this is the topic of my life, the last year and a half.
Of everybody's life, I think.
Yeah, exactly. We're all kind of there together. And I'll go through a little bit of my personal feelings later, but just generally, the thing that everyone's doing right now, and I hope they're doing, but I'm going to give a lot of credit, is you got to think about, whether you call it the software development lifecycle or the product development lifecycle generically, and go from left to right and really apply an AI native lens to each stage to understand what's different in each stage And we can talk about each element: product design, development, QA, deployment. But you have to also think about the end state architecture of that process also merging together and sort of becoming something new in itself. So there's the pieces, each group, product management as a group, then there's the process itself. So we've been going through a stage where we look at each individual group and try to innovate with the AI mentality of what can we do better? What can we be smarter, especially in product management, know the market better? How do we then fill that downstream pipe in a better way so that everyone building code through Claude Code or other tools, traditional tools, is better informed with the intent of the product and has better artifacts to build the product from, which actually pushes left, it shifts left some of the prototyping and some of the code generation, but also allows that just the good traditional PRD, BRD to provide amazing context for creating test cases, for creating, the first version of the code, obviously, all the things that are needed all the way down to, documentation is a huge thing of like, how do you bring a product to market, especially in a business to business context? How do you inform stakeholders within your company what you're even building now that you're building so fast? So the key point is that each stage is changing, but you can't change in isolation. You got to think about it as one coherent process. And that whole process is going to be very different because the roles are going to start. I'm not saying they're going to replace each other, as many people talk. If you're an AI native company starting from scratch, you've got a better opportunity. Most people are retrofitting this into a business that exists, and you have a SaaS product and you have an AI product, et cetera. You can't just completely throw out the old model as much as we'd love to and improve it. You have to coexist with that model. And so there's a lot of improvement that can happen to that existing model as you go to this fully agentic driven product suite that you're going to offer at some point, but also making product in a AI tooling native manner. And we can go through each one of those
parts of
areas.
that? Sorry. Yeah. So are there any of those processes that you see or don't think AI apply at all, or kind of less applicable?
Yeah, I personally have worked on a few things. Let's start at the very top with strategy. So I've built, like many of us, our own kind of operating systems of like, what is my job today and how do I bring scale to what I'm doing? And I started with a really tough nut, which is the product strategy, technology strategy area. And I've built it in a way that's pretty interesting in that one of the big challenges I see with strategy is I don't want an AI to be the strategy. You want a very thoughtful partner that can help you pressure test what you have, point one. So you don't want to outsource that completely. You have tremendous number of signals that happen that come through competitive intelligence, market intelligence, internal decisions, customer feedback, and gathering that in a way that's has persistence, but also is in context of a strategic discussion where at the end of the day, the team needs to decide what the strategy is. I've kind of played the system in that way of bringing efficiency to that process. So I don't want to ever go, hey, Claude, what should we do next? I do want Claude to help me with, these are the signals that have accumulated over the last 30, 60, 90 days. I would suggest your team discuss these and figure out what to do. Here's a recommendation. Here's some data for you to think about. But you don't want to have a coin-operated strategy machine because, for obvious reasons, if you're wrong, there's big stakes there. And again, it's a smart system, but we'll get into context and knowledge later, but it's the systems aren't there yet to give you that kind of context.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes I feel like you're getting the response that you want to get, right? It's very contextual. It's very kind of up to the prompt. It's really what type of skills did you already put in there? So how do you make sure that it's not going into kind of a confirmation bias machine?
That's a great question. I think you have to look at things over time with the AI tools. And you have to be you hear this term judgment, like played over and over in our kids that, what are the kids going to do with AI? And it's all about judgment. You have to be extremely critical with what the outputs are. And you need to have that sense that something is right or wrong. And that's a hard thing to explain to people that, maybe are trying to like build their first strategy or their first PRD. As you get older and more experience across different cycles, and you built your own framework, you're able to kind of pressure test in your mind that something feels right. But you're right, that's the trap also. And so that's where you need to have multiple. I would not remove humans in the loop at all in that process. To then, it's real easy to generate a recommendation through an AI tool. It's still pretty hard to go justify that to a human decision maker or a customer that needs to buy your product and be right. And that's the part that you have to calibrate, and this sense needs to be developed. So to me, that's the important aspect of it, is take everything as a recommendation, a pretty good recommendation, but you still need to go defend it and pressure test it and figure out if it's right over time. And especially with strategy, as you work your way down to little features that are easier to test, you can, take a little more risk there.
100%. So going back to sort of your process of how you're kind of optimizing every step around both the engineering as well as the product processes. So assuming that Aegis is kind of speeding this up dramatically, where's the new bottleneck?
That's a great question. There's kind of two scenarios to think about. One is you've got a brand new product, it's agentic, you're a new company, you've got, model DNA, all that stuff. I think at that point it is, and you can see this with like Anthropic, it's not delivering product to the market. I would say as end users of those types of products is, how do you even know what's there and how do you use it fast enough? Like they're running past us in a marathon pace with a sprint. And I think there's this bottleneck of being able to consume what's being developed. And you think about it, just start that with internal first, right? Which is like, how does your company even know what to bring to market in one manner? So there is a velocity of the company that you need to play with and watch. That's kind of one angle that would say, if you're just, fortunate enough to come out with a new product in this new model. And I think about like if you were building SaaS when SaaS came out, kind of the same thing. The other part would be that there is this concept that if you're bringing a new product in an agentic world on top of something we've all got legacy products or heritage products or just products that we're transforming. At the end of the day, the agentic products sort of sit on top of that. And you're still at the mercy of what those limitations in your product platforms are. And you need to abstract and kind of port away from that. So I think there is that limitation at that point of just thinking about when is your underlying platform. So I can just bring up things like tech debt and all those classic things. Those things don't just go away if you slap an agent on top. You still need to fix the underlying system of your core product. Now, maybe you can re-architect and build it, which again is that same step. So I would say the platform limitations still need to be addressed. And you've heard, probably in the industry, many companies have been very thoughtful about preparing for AI. So I'd call that out as one big thing. The other is then, how do you start to, as you start to implement the left side of the process of bringing specs out super fast, developers now catching that and building code, you still need to test it. You still need to make it work with the customer. And so you can throw a ton of stuff at your customer, but again, to my first point, they've got to be ready to accept it, use it, understand the value of it. So that velocity needs to be kind of, depending on if you're B2C, B2B, it needs to be sort of tweaked according to what your consumption model is at the customer level, because you can flood that with 10 new features. They're not going to know what to do with it necessarily. And you're almost building too much too fast at that point. So I think there's just this psychological point of thinking about how your product's still going to be consumed as you're developing at faster pace and velocity. And the quality still needs to be high, which again, a lot of the code tools, they're getting there, but they're not there 100%. And so you got to watch quality still as part of this process.
Yeah, do you think there is ever going to be a situation where code quality is not a challenge?
I would think it's going to, there's a part of it that tells me yes to an asymptote, because some quality is in the eyes of the beholder, the customer. Did it work as expected? And again, you can create lots of personas and, rapidly scale test cases, but it might not be the same as the actual end user of your product perceiving what the product's supposed to be and then complaining about a certain feature not working as expected or whatever. So sure, over time, but I don't think when you're talking about selling to humans that you can take the human element and completely automate it with AI. Because we just know there's elements about it that are emotional, that are social, that And AI is not going to figure out by just predicting what's the next, thing that it needs to present in a text format or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And you also have this sort of this tension of product management probably wants speed, put more out quicker, right? And engineering is sort of saying, I want this less risky. I need to kind of stay in control. And actually what you're saying is also that there is a customer that is saying, okay, don't give me too much because I cannot consume it at all. So how do you balance these three things?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think there is a feedback loop with the customer in the middle, right? That's your customer that you're marketing to. And product management needs to get, by relieving some of the burden of product management, which would be like information flow, stakeholder interactions, documentation, those kind of, as you start to automate that, it gives you more time to understand truly what your customer wants, the job to be done. And if we can turn the ratio of time up where they're focused more on that and spending more time with the market, then I think the calibration starts to solve itself there a little bit. The collection of that information into a spec, you can almost think of the spec as moving from text to something where applicable in the product to an active prototype, which many of us are doing now. So you're actually communicating with your customers through something that you traditionally needed development to do for you. Build me a model, a demo, build me a prototype. We can do that now. So again, the fidelity of feedback will improve such that you can give a blob of code, whether it's production ready or not, it's another discussion, to your development team that's been looked at and used potentially by dozens of customers. That improves that handoff point downstream. But at the same point, are developers, 100% ready for people that are non-developers to start sending them code because they need to review it. They may need to translate it and then embed it within the production development process. So the shifting of that job is code review, development of skills that can help this upstream development, but also setting guardrails for what's appropriate in that model at the right time of this evolution over the next couple of years. I don't think you want to go and build back-end code if you're a front-end product manager, as an example. So I think there's a kind of a maturing process that needs to happen. And again, where AI works well is always the filter.
Yeah, and it's a good topic that you bring up there, because what you're saying is basically developers needs to spend more time on code review, sort of this architectural overview, kind of make it production ready. And then I'm starting to think about, okay, when you're getting those skills, when you're kind of training yourself, you need to write that software. You need to make all of those mistakes. That's sort of how we do that. How do you see this coming in? Because there is sort of a talent challenge here, possibly. Do you bring in junior developers to spend their time writing software when you have, AI agents that can do it quicker, cheaper, better?
Yeah, I think that is the $1,000,000 question, I guess you would say, in this scenario. Context really matters right now. And again, I would consider most of the world in a transitional state versus a pure native state. And if we separate those two problems, I think they're solved differently. You can definitely, in an AI native state, have a person that's used to building with a set of agents that, has limited context on the current product that can learn very quickly. It's the harness is already developed to allow for that rapid learning. In a transformation where you have lots of legacy code and a legacy software development process, you need to bridge into that model pretty carefully. And just people need to, again, as we talked about last point, like you need to learn how to trust the output of the tool. So just because you're a junior developer that knows Claude code, try marrying that to a production system that's serving regulated customers at scale that's, has to meet compliance needs. Your little agent that you spun out last night, it could potentially cause a data breach or, do something terrible like delete data, or just not work at the product and have a business implication with the customer. So the code generation, of course, it's free now. That doesn't mean the product development is free and needs to be thought through holistically as a 360-degree product.
So in your role and in your organization, how do you think about this compliance framework? I'm not sure if framework is sort of the most attractive conversation to have, but it sort of is this guardrails. How do you make sure that you have the AI agents there? You want to deploy that across the full organization. Everybody's free to go. At the same time, you need to sort of balance this with this sort of how do you keep it all in control type of thing? How do you see this evolving, and what is the biggest challenge to achieve that, would you say?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think there's a risk adoption curve that's happening with just agents right now, and many different customers in different segments. The mileage may vary, but I think everyone's still getting used to the concept of these with some early adopters. And so we're nowhere into the mass adoption curve. And you see the research that's out there where, enterprises are piloting or, trying to figure out how to get value out of these things. So there is a conservative approach right now that says it's not even just the product agent, it's how it was built, how guardrails have been established, how you're proving it's working over time. And if it's a regulated industry or whatever, like, how is it compliant? So to me, that's almost more important right now to get over this trust adoption curve than it is we're producing extremely high value at this level right now, with the product itself. So I think those are the pieces that need to be considered really quickly that lay the enterprise foundation, that the company, as it's designing its enterprise harness, needs to start to really think about that piece. Yeah, so I think, I hate to say it, but there's a lot of stick involved right now because the risk of something going wrong is pretty high, and you're building trust most likely right now for your organization, which has some liability. You're having your customers trust you that agentic behavior is reliable, consistent. And if that is not true, then it's going to come swinging back. And again, the bigger the company, the higher the risk in many cases. So I would believe that, and this is something everyone's trying to figure out, is how to make a governance process scalable for use cases, and so it could be an internal use case. In this case, we're talking more of the product use case, but you need to have the stages that it's almost like what we used to always refer to as a product release checklist, right? When you're about to launch a product, do you have legal agreements and, all those like things that need to be in place. There's a new set of requirements for Gen AI type of applications that need to be considered. So to me, it's just more of the same, but it's for particularly in this area. And whether it's a carrot or stick, it's required. And a lot of my bias, I think, would be is working with financial services customers where there's no way you can even go to market without these things. Maybe with more consumer applications, it's a little softer in terms of the requirements, but it depends on what your product is and what, where it could go wrong. But to me, this is enterprise B2B mandatory. For regulated customer base is mandatory. So whether that's stick or just what you have to do business, you're going to get audited. You're going to be asked for, show me how this agent performed and why it performed that way. And show me, just like model governance in the machine learning world, similar stuff is going to happen here. And there's some regulations that they've actually punted, that they're looking at how to take Gen AI from the machine learning governance regulations and apply it. It's coming. And I think at that point, it's a stick, like any other sort of compliance requirement and certification that you need to have.
Make a little sense. So in this world or in this transition, what is the most common mistake you see organizations or kind of executive management is doing within this product and engineering field?
Yeah, we can share a lot of the ones we've made, but I think there's lots of common rules that other folks are running into.
I would love to have kind of some practical stories. They may or may not be true. That's right. Okay.
No, I think it's sort of figuring out this is an uncharted path. And myself, I've been through a number of technology evolutions over the years and decades. Unfortunately, this one feels so different because it applies horizontally to everything, all of your internal processes, all of your SDLC, to your product. It's just different. Like mobile, I don't necessarily use a mobile app for like my B2B stuff, internally to the enterprise that my employee things. But mobile did have a pretty big effect on user experience, but this, not to this degree. And so I think that it's uncharted territories in many ways that needs to be looked at. It's hard, and again, in the concept of this conversation, it's hard to separate the internal from the external when you're in this type of role. And you've got to think about as much what you're doing to make the product as you are what your product is. And I would call that sort of the first two concentric circles. we're in business with a product. You got to make the product. We're using these technologies, but then very quickly, the next concentric circle is your company and your stakeholder. So how are they consuming the information that you're now building in this new manner? And then of course, out it goes into the market and so on. So I think not thinking about it holistically or just like, let's go build an agent and go figure it out from there is one common mistake. The other huge common mistake is not being hands-on personally for this stuff from as fast as you can do it. And we all struggle from our day jobs and figuring out how to find the time to do these things. But we're way past that point. And the only way to truly understand how to change an organization or a process or your product is to physically do it yourself in other instances, or maybe within your own product if you're lucky in terms of your position and what you do, your skill set. So the lack of firsthand involvement, to me, you miss sort of that deep level of understanding. And again, I say that as a mistake of like, how do we even keep up with this stuff, right? Like even if we think we are being super active and it is changing so much that it's a full-time job to figure out what are the new capabilities that you can then leverage to then test and figure out and how to use. But just generally not being firsthand. And then there's this big, I'm not even call it debate, but decision of top-down mandates versus bottoms-up usage of these technologies. And I think you can't go with just one approach. I think you have to do both. And you have to manage through, leadership, through organizational directives, but also enabling the team to really embrace it and figure it out for themselves. Where do you give them time to do that when we all know the pressure of execution is so high and Horizon 1 products are so high when you start thinking about Horizon 2, Horizon 3? You need to make space for these things. It's not just going to happen overnight or it won't happen fast enough. So I think that figuring out that balance between all these different dimensions of how to get an organizational shift is the art of this thing right now, because it differs per organization, per product, and other factors. The nature of your organization, centralized, distributed, all those things. So I think that's another area that took some trial and error to figure out. And we all saw the press releases last year of mandates by certain companies, and they were criticized. But where are they today? You might want to ask that question. And did it work? It comes down to leadership style also. But I think some of those things are pretty important. And there's a ton of experimentation is the key point on this stuff right now to figure out how to use it, what's applicable, and how to scale. And they all build on each other organizationally. The development team does something, the product management team does something. How do those two marry together? Then you go to the next level and the next level, and how do those two marry together? Stuff shifts to the left, shifts to the right. All those things really change this dynamic of what that horizontal process is at the end of the day.
And so this top-down, bottoms-up type of movement is a super interesting one. And do you run a risk if you're too much top-down in order to kind of kill the bottoms-up sort of initiative, or kind of the movement that is happening there from the ICs and hands-on keyboards?
It's hard for me to judge what other folks are doing in their companies and their positions.
Sure.
But my personal views are, short answer be yes to some degree. But I also feel that this is the greatest opportunity for everybody to invest in their individual careers that's ever been presented. So when you mandate something, it's almost like you should be doing this yourself for your own career more than you should be doing it because you're being told to do it at work. So that's where I personally have kind of felt the need of, and this includes myself, right, of having to take a retooling initiative even ahead of being told to do it for the business. And I think the folks that do that are going to be fine. The folks that don't, I really question what the trade-off is in their minds. Because if you're not on the front line of this, you're not going to figure out what your new job should be and how to add extreme value. And there's a curve that's going to happen of advantage. And that curve is not linear. So the longer you wait, the separation becomes more and more. And I think that's the arguments that top-down should present. That's like, this is as good for yourself as it is for the company. We're going to give you the tools and the space and the training that you need to get there. But at the end of the day, you need to take this and run with it.
Yeah, if you're in an organization that is not doing this top-down, you should be running away, because that's not the type of organization one we are.
Agree. And the pressure is coming from shareholders and investors and, just the business. So I don't think top-down pressure is the problem. It's how it's being done
Yeah.
is the nuance, I think,
Yeah.
maybe to your point.
What would you say? I mean, you were touching upon this, sort of you need to stay hands-on yourself. You need to kind of get that sort of experience on how does this really work for your role and sort of have your own experience on this. So what would you say AI fluency actually means for senior product management and the engineering leaders today?
So the collective group are responsible for seeing a vision of what this process is going to become. And that can't be just, here's the story, go figure it out, especially on the development side, that there's such a nuanced back engine sort of system that needs to be changed. The leaders really need to help their teams reconstruct that, which means they need to be on the front line of it. The way you, as I mentioned, you do that is you sort of envision yourself kind of in the new role, hands-on, and again, not telling how it needs to be done, but being able to consult and be part of the solution and be part of the unknown. So I think that embracing change, embracing the unknown is the critical kind of managerial trait there in many ways. The other part, I think, is that there's just a general question, says, depending on whether you're on the product management side or the development side, is what are you trying to do with these technologies? One is you want to get scale. You want to get smarter with what you're doing in your job, process more information, remember more information, make better decisions with that information. And at the end of the day, development-wise, build better code. Many aspects are involved with that can be tools you can build to help yourself in that and help your team. So I think we'll get to this knowledge point I brought up earlier, where all of this is predicated on context that you teach the AI, especially when you're in a company with proprietary data. You can't just offload that to a model. Most companies will not allow that. So have you assembled the right set of knowledge that will allow for that to work? And this is almost bringing back documentation knowledge as like a first-class citizen. Because the more you train, then the better that the outcome's going to be. And if you just go right into general advice on generally trained models, you're going to get some junk. So there's this curation of knowledge within a company that a lot of the forward companies really hit head on. We started to build a whole new knowledge pipeline a year ago that lays that foundational system to build this intelligence layer on top. So I would say that applies to all those different aspects. The artifacts you use every day, the tribal knowledge, the strategies, the best practices, the way that the architecture is built, the way that the process runs to deliver code. Those need to be curated and dusted off and maintained in a way that stay current from this point forward, because the magic happens on the back end of that. So that's a shift for many folks that are maybe kind of treated that as sort of a second-class citizen over the last several years.
Yeah, that's definitely a big change. So another thing I was thinking about there is sort of, we are talking about this sort of, it's depends if it's an AI native versus if you're already in business and are applying AI and sort of moving in this direction. Do you see there is a world where you could survive as a non-AI native company, or is AI native companies going to overtake everything just because they can run so much faster? And so basically, I think what I'm thinking about is sort of, is there any competitive advantage that you can sort of lean towards and sort of build and protect yourself from those fast-paced AI native companies?
Yeah, I think that it depends on the type of product and the type of company you have. And some companies, and there's been, obviously the SaaS analysis that's been going on for a couple months now, where some SaaS companies are going to be challenged and some are going to be fine. And it comes down to really deeply thinking about your value proposition and really fortifying that. And in some cases, that might go on outside the original perimeter of your product, the perimeter of your original product, to become more of a combination of products across an ecosystem. In other ways, we've heard the terms of system of record, things that can't be AI'd, and just doubling down in those areas as your core value proposition. Because we've seen, with some of the releases from the model companies, that they're allowing some companies that help you create products or help you create outputs, legal tools, et cetera, that might be good enough with using a specially trained model with the tools now that those companies have. Where other products that are really, involve compliance or, operational systems or processing systems that are very complex, it's not going to happen anytime soon. But I think the point is that if you're not also in that product space and operating in this model, you're still at risk, because somebody will acquire an asset and combine it with an AI native harness and, be able to accelerate in many ways because their market share has increased or, their funding is attractive right now and other valuations are reduced. So there's a set of scenarios I think that need to be applied that no one is particularly able to sit on their hands right now, whether it's the execution side or the product development side. But the final point there is that the current product markets or current customer markets can't shift fast enough to just go fully agentic in the next 6 months. This is not an overnight thing. Companies have governance and, end users to train and, systems to replace. Some of these systems are very difficult to replace. So there is going to be a coexistence model for several years.
So 5 years from now, what would be the role that is in product management that we don't see know of today?
5 years. Wow, that's a tough one.
That's a long time.
It is. I like to use the phrase of AI time versus non-AI time, and 5 years in AI time is 10 some exponential curve on top of 5 years. At the end of the day, as I sort of started with, I think we need to understand a market and make very complex strategic decisions in the form of almost gambling of capital to build a product that we think is going to work in a market over a future period. That's the essence of building product, whether it's software, hardware, it doesn't matter. Hardware is harder, obviously. That's still always going to be a non-zero risk game because things change so much. What's the next AI, technology? Is it, what fundamentally changes our customers' behavior, their end users' behavior, that then triggers back the next evolution. So in that time frame, it's difficult to ascertain, what exactly would happen at that point. But fundamentally, nothing ever changes that. You have to get smarter with predicting needs and using scarce resources. Now, do resources go to infinite because of this model? They strongly improve. And you can build code in 5 years for sure overnight and have a model of a product that's, available instantly to test and see if it works. So your iteration cycle goes to almost immediate in many ways. But I also believe that products are going to compound in intelligence and complexity to deliver higher level needs than anything we can think of right now. And so that's still going to keep track with our ability to produce faster, in my opinion. And, we're going to have robots that are extremely sophisticated, doing unbelievable combinations of events. So you need a system that can program that and behave, have that model behave in a way that powers that robot across, autonomous, whether it's in your house or at work or producing things, that's very different than today. So complexity is going to continue to increase, which still requires a high degree of sophistication of knowing what to build, using finite or less finite, but still finite to some degree resources and be right, which oftentimes takes a period of time to vet. So maybe that calibration cycle of did you build the right thing gets compressed also, but it's not going to go to zero. So my belief is that it's going to free the product management side to think harder about farther timelines, more complex products, and faster iteration cycles to build something quickly. We're going to see a lot of automation from cars to robots to space to you name it. And those are hard challenges that are pushing human limits right now and will continue to. So AI will help us along that journey. It's not in 5 years, not going to solve that.
If you could change one thing about how product and engineering organization are structured, what would that be?
Yeah, I think nothing beats context of what to build. And there should be no gatekeeper of what the market and customer wants. So allowing everyone to participate in that intelligence of this is what the customer markets want. I think that data is hard to consume today if you're an engineer, unless you're there in the room and hearing. So imagine, things are being recorded more, things are being processed more, they go into a central knowledge base. And as an engineer, I could ask, what is the need of this segment of customers with this particular problem in this time frame? And I get an extremely intelligent answer that is democratized across the organization. There's your context for what to build. So I think that's a very important aspect, that information gets utilized in a way that can be interrogated by an AI for whoever wants to use it. Product management, writing a spec, building a prototype, designer thinking about the next evolution of what it looks like, to the engineer who's making the code. And clearly this is what brings in the blurring of the roles discussion, right? So does specialization of those roles go away anytime soon? Probably not. Do people get to do more? Product managers are building prototypes that become live code, designers that do the same, engineers that have this powerful context that can then build features without any product management involvement? Yes. Those will all start to approach each other. But at the end of the day, these are highly sophisticated skill sets that will evolve with the use of these tools and is not going to go away, in my opinion. No one is perfect at knowing what to build, product after product, cycle after cycle, company evolution after company evolution. That's why M&A strategy exists. All these things are byproducts of the need for companies to grow with more complex and more diverse products. And that still requires a lot of knowledge of what's in the market, what are the trends, and to build opinions around that. Not going to go away.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is all we are going to have time for today. Before we wrap, if people want to follow you, where is the best place to go?
LinkedIn would be the best place to go.
Connect up and keep the conversation going on LinkedIn, guys. Well, it's been really fun conversation, and I have definitely learned a lot on how you think around this AI product engineering future. Let's say it's in the making right now. Let's keep in touch, and thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.